The other day when I did a transition in one of my videos in another part of my life, I tried to quote Monty Python, and I said, "And now for something completely new." I got it wrong. And I think what they say, "And now for something completely different." Well, let's have some fun with this astrology. I'm going to make the scientists go, "That's bunk, that's bunk, that's bunk, that's bunk, that's bunk." Why, that's like numerology. That's bunk too. Astrology is bunk and numerology is bunk and Tarot, you had a book on Tarot. Tarot is bunk. It's all bunk, 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 bunk. Nobody in their right mind should pay attention to it. Well, this little book is it's a curiosity. Now, when I was in my Berkeley years, I used to wander around bookstores. And I'd see a book. And I thought at that time that I was going to be a magician because I was studying Franz Barden. We'll get into him later. And I should get a collection of books on magic, and I knew I needed to know something about astrology, but there were only 500,000 books on astrology. You know, and I was poor, and I didn't have a lot of money to spend on this, that, and the other thing, so I would look at books, and I would feel a kind of tug. And I'm seriously talking about this. I'd feel this tug inside my soul, you know, this kind of... And after a while, I had this sense that I either had a good instinct or there was a little spiritual being that knew what cool books were, and so I would, as much as possible, I would follow the tug. I would buy a book. I wouldn't know what was in it. I didn't know what was in this book. But I felt the tug, and I got this book. And then I read it, and of course it's straightforward astrology. You start to read it, straightforward astrology. You know, it's got the zodiac and all the rest of this. But it does a kind of funny thing. Now I'm going to pause here and go grab something else because I want to show you a picture. Okay, I'm back. I want to tell you a little story. This is called the Zodiac of Dendara, and it's an effort to interpret it. And here's a different picture of it. I don't know how that's going to do in terms of the light. You know, trying to move it around a little bit, get some of the reflection off it so that you can see it there. Now this thing is either on a wall or on a ceiling in Egypt. And the reason I bring it up is because this book by so-called Saint Germain supposed to have in the front of it what he called the Sculptured Zodiac of Dendara, D-E-N-D-E-R-A-H. Okay. So this is not your usual astrology. And of course what he says in here is he says basically that this is the way the ancients looked at it. And by the ancients he meant, you know, the Egyptians and such. Okay, well, yeah, we knew they had zodiac stuff and all the rest of that. But one of the things you have to realize is when conventional archaeologists and stuff look at this stuff, they come out of the standpoint of science and they'll look at something and they won't actually see it. Because they will assume it's a religious idea of these peoples, and as such it's got weaknesses. You know, it's not quite up to snuff. Because it's religious or spiritual or something like that. Anyway, now this little curious book that I got, I started studying it, and during the period of my study of it, I discovered something very interesting that was really surprising. Remember when I was going yuck about astrology and numerology and tarot, all got to be junk. Well, this is the only book in which I've seen those three systems united in a single point of view. Now, if you're into occult literature and want to seriously think about it, that's a very interesting thing, you know. And it makes a lot of sense that the ancients would, in fact, have a synthesis, a synthetic idea about the kinds of things that they looked at. So that when they looked at the stars and when they looked at human biographies and at history, and when they looked at the divine thing that they discovered in numbers, and let's remember, modern mathematicians are amazed by what lives in numbers, you know. And when they looked at symbol systems, you know, the hieroglyphs, remember the hieroglyphs? You know, they wrote symbols, and if we don't understand the symbols the way they understood them, we're not going to understand what they were talking about. And in this book, the implications are that you'll get an insight into how these ancient people understood the cosmos in which they lived. And it's a much richer understanding than the general negative ideas that people have today about occult thoughts, where they say numerology and tarot and astrology are bunk, because what this guy does in this book in unifying these three systems is rather amazing. And I'm not saying, you know, that it's absolutely true and people should practice this astrology. I will say, as a matter of fact, though, that when I was learning this stuff, there was one year I did what's called a horoscope of revolution using the methods. And this is when you look at your life and get a prediction of what's going to happen in a particular year using the system. And it said I was going to have a major illness, and I did. I had a serious major illness. Okay? And I discovered this after effect. It isn't like it predicted it and then I went out and da-da-da. I had the major illness, and then I did a horoscope of revolution a few months later, and there it was, right in the middle of the horoscope of revolution. And that year, I was going to have a major illness. Now, this is just for fun, okay? Now, people think, well, astrology, da-da-da, we can't pay any attention to it. But the fact is that there are people who have updated it, and they have a new thing, and they call it astrosophy. And here's one of the leading writers of it. You know, if you want to collect books, you want to get Willie Zucker. It's hard to get Willie Zucker, but he's out there. You can look up, there's people practicing astrosophy, which is a new astrology. And it's an effort to do an astrology which returns the impulses of science to it. Now, somebody can say, well, it's all bunk. That's fine. But if you're a scientist, you don't prejudge. You don't say it's all bunk. You go out and you examine the thing. And that's with all these other books, you know. Some stuff from my library.